Hello, and welcome to today's health webinar. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Alignment AI. We would like to remind you that the Q&A feature is available, so feel free to send in your questions and comments throughout today's webinar. We would love to hear from you. And with that, I will turn it over to our moderator, Andrea Bodnari.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the next chapter in Healthcare AI, Production Oversight. I'm Andrea Botnar, CEO of Alignment AI, and I'll be your moderator today. At Alignment, we work at the intersection of AI governance and healthcare transformation. And I have to tell you, this is the most exciting time I've seen in my career. We're not just talking about incremental improvements anymore. We're witnessing the potential to fundamentally transform how healthcare is delivered through AI, making healthcare more precise, more accessible, and more equitable. Here's what's happening right now. AI is helping radiologists detect cancers earlier with accuracy rates exceeding 94%. AI is reducing diagnostic errors, which affect an estimated 12 million Americans annually, by flagging anomalies human eyes can miss. And sepsis prediction models are giving clinicians 6 to 8 hour head starts to intervene before patients deteriorate. But here's what I've learned working with healthcare organizations. The gap between promise and impact isn't about the AI technology anymore. It's about the infrastructure we build around it. The organizations achieving these remarkable outcomes, the ones actually transforming care delivery, have something in common. They've built AI production oversight frameworks that accelerate innovation rather than constrain it. And today we brought together leaders who are doing exactly this, transforming AI governance and making sure AI governance is an accelerator for overall healthcare transformation. And we're going to hear how each of these leaders are transforming their enterprises from a different vantage point across the healthcare ecosystem. Before we dive in, let's hear from our panelists. I'm going to ask each of you to take 1 minute to introduce yourself and share what's the most exciting AI-driven transformation you're working on or witnessing right now. Natalia, let's start with you.
Sure. Thank you so much. Well, I'm very excited to be here. I work for Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. I lead a portfolio of projects that are focused on AI for decision making, decision intelligence. A lot of those type of projects that are focused on helping operations and improving clinical workflows with AI. Before joining MSK, I worked for 11 years at SAS. I worked on implementing AI across different industries, retail, manufacturing, healthcare as well. I love teaching, so I teach at Duke in their Masters in AI, a class for practical optimization. A little bit more focused on this panel, I co-founded the AI governance committee at MSK about 3 years ago. That has been a very, very fascinating journey so far. In terms of excitement, I think one of the projects that I really love is we're partnering with our medical physics group, they are so advanced in AI and kind of the platform that they have built and how they're moving forward. So that is kind of very, very exciting, and basically they have a platform that allows for all these add-ons with AI to help the clinical workflow and basically to bring a better and faster radon treatment to our patients.
Thank you, Natalia. Romy, would you like to go next?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Andrea, for inviting me. My name is Romy Hussein. Most recently, I was Vice President of AI Product at Elevance Health, which is a large payer organization. Previously, I was at both Optum and Oscar. So I've spent quite a bit of time on the payer side of the healthcare ecosystem, attempting to figure out the ways in which the sort of, inch deep but mile wide claims modality can inform the long-term trajectory and prediction, inference, if you will, of patient health over time. Prior to my work on the payer side, I was the chief economist at Johns Hopkins. Before that, at Yale New Haven Health System. So I worked for twice as long for half as much money on the provider side of the equation, where a lot of my work revolved around the idea of predicting the next most likely disease state, even when it's incredibly fuzzy and not necessarily, Natalia, to your point, observable to the naked eye. So I am perhaps most excited by a new wave of products that bring together the best of AI tooling, whether it's autonomous agents or LLM capabilities, or even chain native support systems with the very deep and very real misaligned incentives and sort of legacy challenges that we've seen in the healthcare system for as long as I can remember. So I think that there is going to be unlocked a very interesting new suite of, I would like to say, not just platforms, but perhaps infrastructure in the coming years. And so excited to be a part of that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Romy. Vic, would you like to go next?
Sure, happy to. And thank you, Andrea, for hosting this panel and for having me too. My name is Vic Wadhwani. I am the Chief Product and Transformation Officer at NCQA. As a refresher, NCQA is an independent nonprofit that helps define and drive healthcare quality. We do that through our accreditation standards and performance management and expert advisory offerings. One of the things I'm most excited as we see the application of AI in a variety of use cases that have an impact on healthcare quality is actually seeing how AI is being used to detect quality signals very early. And it's actually also being used then to analyze those quality signals and deliver those signals at the point of care. And it's all being done through a variety of different applications of AI. But it's pretty exciting to see that we're moving to a world where digital quality can be delivered at the point of care with AI-assisted technology. So excited to talk more about that during the rest of the seminar today.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Vic. And Sean, please bring us home.
Thank you, Andrea, and thanks for putting this great webinar on. I'm honored to be here. I'm Sean Carroll. I am the current CEO and chairman of OnPoint Healthcare Partners. Close to 40 years in healthcare IT with organizations like Nuance Healthcare, Arcadia, and WebMedics prior to this focus. I share your exuberance over the moment in time that we're in. It is the most fascinating, exhilarating, and terrifying time in healthcare, I think, from a lot of perspectives. OnPoint is working with health systems, large independent provider groups and MSOs to implement an AI driven platform approach to automating all workflows in the practice. Very excited about the response to this, but the governance that's needed for this, both at the customer and as a company deploying this kind of complex solution is table stakes. So I'm so glad we're having this conversation. In terms of what I'm currently most excited about, I'm excited about the evolution of orchestrated agentic AI. And I'll leave it at that for further comment later.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. We have clinical innovation, we have payer transformation, industry standards, and the AI vendor all represented on today's panel. So I'm very excited for the conversation. And as some of you already alluded, research shows that healthcare organizations with mature AI governance are twice more likely to achieve ROI within 12 months. And the question is why? And what we've seen at Alignment is that this acceleration of ROI happens because organizations eliminate the uncertainty. They build stakeholder trust and create repeatable processes with AI governance. So I'd love to explore how organizations are unlocking this AI transformation. Maybe we can start with the foundation, building governance infrastructure that powers innovation. The best programs I've seen don't ask, what can't we do? They ask, how can we do this? but do this safely, effectively, and at scale. Most AI governance programs that are effective are innovation accelerators. So, Natalia, I would love to hear from you first on this one. Maybe you can talk to us a bit about how MSK, being at the forefront of clinical AI deployment, is approaching this dynamic. Maybe you can touch a bit on how you transition AI models from research to production, and specifically what AI practice delivered the biggest innovation dividend, the thing that made your team say, hey, this is actually helping us move faster.
Thanks. That's a great question. I think so. Couple elements, and you touched it actually. Very important was in our journey is differentiating between the type of AI and the AI that is meant to go into the clinic right now, which is high risk, and we need to watch it very closely and have all sorts of testing and evaluations around it, all the way through operational AI, back office AI, and to research. And research is a really interesting one because for us, it's also really important not to stifle research. Research and our clinicians are highly educated in AI, and they do fantastic research. If we tell them that, well, now you have to go through this whole process, and that's not how we want to approach it. We really want to give them, they need the space for innovation. So we give them certain guidance, but where we have to come in as governance committee is once the technology is getting ready towards thinking about deployment. Because of course, if there is a research tool that's getting ready to deployment, we absolutely have to put it within our processes. But so that differentiation is something that I consider very, very important. And it's not as straightforward as you will believe. What is actually research versus kind of how fast does it go into deployment? But that kind of that intelligence that goes into differentiating, I think has been key for us to accelerate and support research as well as responsible use in the workflows, in the clinical and back office workflows.
Thank you. Thank you, Natalia. Those are very important insights. And I'd love to shift the conversation over here to Romy, specifically at the scale you've experienced at payers like Elevance and UHG. You've probably seen AI deployed across multiple lines of business, touching millions of members. In your experience, what does an ideal governance infrastructure look like that enables that kind of velocity? And how do you maintain agility while ensuring consistency?
I think it's a fantastic question, Andrea, and I would split it into two parts. I think that there is the tools and the capabilities that unlock value at scale. There are certain things that LLMs are great at, whether that's retrieval, extraction, inference. What are the ways in which we can make those pipelines replicable, systematic, deployable in an instant? There could be platforms associated with that where we want to say, hey, these are capabilities everybody across the organization wants to use. How do we set up the capabilities? How do we ensure that they are safely kind of routed in the ways that they need to be to create these paved paths of deployment, of research through deployment? I think there is a way to say, hey, we're going to productize those. Essentially, the AI platform and capabilities, the tooling itself becomes almost like a platform layer within the large enterprise organization. On the flip side, though, where's the value? Where does the value come from? This is what I would call kind of the traditional practice of product, if you will. What are the ways that we go out and say, hey, business, what are the problems that are facing you? Can we solve it with this suite of capabilities that we've stood up internally on these paved paths of production? And if not, what are the additional capabilities that we need to stand up? We're finding new ones every day. It could be a voice agent. It could be maybe we want to be able to create videos sort of on the fly that aren't necessarily like, something that our marketing team is standing up. Those are all, I would call net new capabilities that we discovered by embedding our product folks in the field with our customers. The closer you are to the customer, the better you know the problem you're solving. So I would say that this kind of dual approach of understanding exactly what it is you need to solve and what the capabilities are that you can leverage against those value streams. To me, has looks like it's shown the greatest value. But again, I think like in that core infrastructure platform play, that's really where the governance becomes. This is the easy button. This is the path of least resistance by which we're deploying safely. We know our safeguards, our guardrails are up, and we're not worried about kind of a million copies of data spread on people's laptops. We know how it looks from the inside out. So let's make it easy for folks to do exactly that and to start to deploy at scale.
Very, very important points. And what I'm hearing from you, Romy, too, is that a lot of success comes from collaboration, internal collaboration. And I'd love to turn it over to Sean for a bit over here. There's internal collaboration that enables governance programs to succeed within the enterprise, but there's also a need for external collaboration with AI vendors. And I'd be curious to hear from you, Sean, what you're seeing in terms of governance approaches across different health systems. At OnPoint Healthcare, you partner with different health systems of different scales as well. In your experience, which organizations are moving faster from evaluation to deployment, and what are the patterns that you see that enables that agility of speed for those organizations?
Well, terrific question. Not surprisingly, we see all different flavors out there. I think it's a testament to the state of the market. Most mature health systems have established governance, but they're in some part of the journey of figuring out how AI is different in terms of that governance. Um, the best governance is born from a customer perspective, from as we see it, is born from collaboration within the organization. So it's obvious that there are many stakeholders, but there's well-organized leadership around that governance. They are focused on the right type of scrutiny with respect to a vendor. Not just does the vendor have scrutiny, but take me through all aspects of how your AI is developed, what you do when you're monitoring AI performance, how you react, how you can adjust when things are not going as you like or as we like as the user. And so really the more scrutinizing the decision to engage with a partner like OnPoint or any vendor is usually a pretty good indication that their governance is more well developed. I will say that as again, no surprise here, as AI becomes more sophisticated in its deployment. For example, when we live in a world where agentic or AI agents are working with other agents, as opposed to an agent solving for one particular, say, workflow, and trying to automate it almost in a vacuum, when you envision many agents, perhaps from many different providers, working together, the governance gets almost geometrically more complex. And so I think organizations that are thinking already about that, while taking care of what's real today, I think are the customers that are best for us from a futuristic point of view, but more importantly are best positioned for the future of what's ahead for all of us.
Very important observations here, Sean, and it's a great build out for the next question I want us to all explore together. I'd love to talk specifically about where we're headed as an organization. So the regulatory and standards landscape is evolving. It's evolving rapidly, and I see this as an incredibly positive development. It's a development that is creating the foundation for AI to eventually become standard of care across healthcare, to Roma's initial point here. Vic, NCQA is helping shape this future. Could you tell us a bit about the opportunity you're seeing with industry-led AI certification programs, industry-led AI standards? And specifically, maybe you can elaborate a bit on how are these standards and certifications creating pathways for innovation to scale responsibly? And when we look at the healthcare leaders that we have here as audience for the webinar, how can they prepare for the specifics that will help them accelerate their AI strategies?
It's great. I'm sure my esteemed panel here will weigh in on this too. The way what we're seeing in the industry, Andrea, obviously there's a lot of good work done around responsible AI deployment frameworks at the national level, at the local level. There is a lot of good work done around generalized AI governance playbooks. But where we're really seeing a lot of interest, a lot of energy is to really um, as an industry work through use case specific implementation playbooks. Different types of applications of AI with different methods of AI within different environments, whether that's clinical decision making or real-time interventions or administrative, really have a different risk level associated with them and a need for a different trust a framework associated with them. So where we're seeing a lot of energy is for the high risk, high impact use cases that we know have an impact on patient safety, on quality, on better clinical and financial outcomes. This desire to build implementation playbooks that are not just looking at a given AI model or a given AI solution or a given AI vendor offering, but are looking at the entire workflow and how is that workflow being redesigned for collaborative decision making? How is that workflow accounting for staff competency training? How is that workflow accounting for input and output interface management, including automations? How is that workflow accounting for what Sean talked about around agent to agent interactions, right? It's what is that overall way to monitor the entire workflow? The second part of the answer to that question is, okay, great. If we've got these use case specific implementation frameworks or playbooks, so governance will essentially evaluate implementations against those playbooks. But then there's a desire to really focus governance on real-time validation, right? Not just what we ought to do, but what is really happening with clinical outcomes, including quality, patient safety, patient satisfaction, et cetera, right? And how is that monitoring actually happening, and what are those transparency metrics we need to have? And that's where we're seeing a lot of traction in the industry around having standardized frameworks for that, standardized ways to actually track those outcomes, monitor those outcomes, and compare those outcomes. And when you compare those outcomes, to double click and say, what might be causing a difference in outcome A versus outcome B? Is it the localized implementation? Is it human in the loop and staff training? Is it the model itself, right? Is it the interfaces with the workflow that need to take the outputs of the models? That's where governance really plays a role in actually meaningfully improving clinical and financial outcomes. So hopefully that was a helpful broader framing for what I suppose will be some additional points we can dig into.
Yeah,
Do you
absolutely.
mind
Thank you
if
so
I
much.
jump? Is that
Yeah,
okay? So actually, Vic, you mentioned something that I think is really has been really important for us as well, is kind of that differentiation of the
mm,
use case as well as the stage and creating different
that's right.
processes or different gates. Kind of how do you approach governance depending on the use case, right? Because you approach different a process that is diagnosing cancer progression versus a use case that
Mm,
helps us with supply chain decisions, right? And that is a very important concept because then that allows you to focus on the high risk implementations and but still giving some guidance to implementations that are lower risk. So I really believe that that segmentation and those kind of different playbooks, as you call them, has been key for us to also kind of roll out our governance processes.
This might be a different flavor on that same idea. But one of the things that I've seen work quite well across large organizations, particularly, is, to your point, segmenting the task, if you will. What is it that we're actually trying to accomplish against the tool? Are we using an LLM or a shallow learning model against the almost like language, if you will, the jargon? Hey, certain LLMs are going to treat clinical jargon differently than they're going to treat legalese. It almost becomes different languages. So establishing that benchmarking and evaluation system that's segmented by those three vectors or axes that you guys mentioned, I think is such an important way to ensure that the models are acting how we think they're supposed to act at scale.
And
I
maybe
might
to
I might
go ahead, Sean.
pile on one more time here. I think what we see is that the best governance relationship between vendor and customer is usually comes from sharing where you are in your governance journey. This is where how we govern. How are you governing, and trying to push that together, because very rarely is it fully crystallized for anybody. And so that collaboration, which was mentioned earlier, that merger of how do you approach governance in this new world of AI, here's how we do it, often puts you in a place where things get off to the right track.
Thank you so much, everyone. And I'd love to double click on the points we just discussed over here around standards. I'd love to hear from the panel. What is your practical experience managing different standards and maybe different obligations around AI governance, and whether you have any recommendations for the audience over here on how to handle interoperability of AI governance standards? So, for example, from a vendor perspective, Sean, you might have to comply to different governance standards at different health systems that you're interacting with. Similarly, internally in-house, maybe you're looking at NCQA standards, maybe you're looking at ISO standards, etc. So I wonder whether you've found certain best practices that introduce efficiency, introduce trustworthiness of these AI implementations, and really enable AI governance to be an enabler without much overhead around maintenance.
Well, of course, we work towards the standards that a customer embraces first and foremost to the extent that we can, and if that's the starting point with everything. I think as AI adoption becomes more pervasive, it's really the industry's responsibility to do the right thing, to ensure trust of providers, patients, and how everything is affected by AI in terms of patient care. Interoperability and standardization, I know from past lives, is a journey we all continue to be on. I think the more standardization that we can broadly adopt, the better for AI and AI governance. But part of the value of AI is not to get overly boxed in by standards as it relates to better interpretations for health and healthcare, and how to run better operations. One of the things we see in relation to how standards apply is as agentic tools become more developed, and workflows in the way they've been practiced over decades begin to collapse into one another, because you can apply agentic intelligence into them. Sometimes standards are very helpful to make that happen, and sometimes they seem to be impeding that process. So I think this is all an opportunity for more advancement from a standards perspective as it relates to AI governance. But there are certain scenarios where the two collide in a way where they kind of get in the way of each other.
That's fair. Thank you, Sean. Romy, Natalia, do you have anything you'd like to share over here in terms of interoperability of different standards and how to make that an efficient journey within the enterprise?
I think my the other panelists covered it really well. I think I'm just kind of mentioning as well the large organizations that are kind of helping to maybe standardize in a way. And I believe there has to be some standardization such that we can easily talk to each other. At the same time, there will be always kind of some tailoring to the organizations. But for example, the Chai group, as well as some kind of leaders in this field as Duke, MSK, we have been published on this as well. Other kind of smaller organizations that need some guidance could use that at least as a kind of starting point. And because I do believe there is a benefit on at least certain standardization across the industry.
Makes sense. Thank you. Thank you, Natalia. There's a lot to celebrate in healthcare AI today. There's way more proofs of concept that have moved into production. We're past that ideation stage, and AI is delivering measurable improvements in patient outcomes, in clinical efficiency, in access to care. And just like Vic mentioned earlier, now big conversation to be had across the industry is how are we maintaining oversight over these powerful systems that are moving in production, and what is the standard for that oversight. And I'd love to switch the conversation a bit on how we can advance equity through this oversight. Where production oversight becomes really powerful is where it can ensure that AI doesn't just transform healthcare, but it transforms it equitably. A recent Harvard pathology study revealed something important, that AI models can detect patterns that were invisible to human pathologists. That is very powerful. But without proper oversight, those same models showed diagnostic performance disparities across demographic groups. So this isn't a reason to slow down. It's a reason, though, to build better oversight over AI systems. Because when we monitor for these issues proactively, we can build AI systems that actually reduce healthcare disparities rather than amplify them. And Natalia, I'd love to move this conversation over to you initially at MSK. How are you approaching fairness testing and demographic performance monitoring as an opportunity, as a way to ensure that your AI tools deliver excellent care across all patient populations? And maybe if there's specific frameworks or specific processes that are enabling you to build more equitable diagnostic tools, maybe that's something you could touch on as well for the audience today.
Sure. I think that the one key concept here is human in the loop. And we believe very strongly in all clinical implementations. Again, there's differentiation, right? Because operational, back office, and clinical, but our clinical implementations, the inclusion of a human in the loop since the beginning, in the process. At the same time, have very clear definitions of the roles, who owns that AI, who's the one who does the technical decisions, who's the one who oversees the ROI, who's the human in the loop. So kind of defining those roles very clearly since the beginning. And that translates also into the monitoring part. Most of our requirements at this point for clinical implementations does require some level of human in the loop, and that's where they tailor the evaluation for is the tool equitable, as well as kind of managing that with the benefit that the tool can provide. So I will kind of say human in the loop is our most important concept there.
Very, very insightful. And Vic, from a standards perspective, how is performance monitoring becoming part of the pathway to certification? Is this an opportunity to create trust and demonstrate that AI is improving care for all populations as part of a standard certification pathway?
Absolutely. In fact, I was going to add to what Natalia said. There's really two aspects to this. One is in addition to human in the loop, the human out on the loop. which is taking those clinical and financial outcomes that we just talked about in the earlier discussion, right, around patient safety and care delivery and patient access, taking those outcomes, actually tracking them against baselines. So what's happening today, right? And then further, once there are AI-assisted systems, multi-agent assisted solutions, workflow redesign happening, how are we going to actually keep tracking those outcomes and now stratify those outcomes by population considerations, right? Whether it's rural populations or populations with a disability or race, ethnicity, right? Pick your stratification. So really for us, as we think about certification, bread and butter is outcomes monitoring, right? Around that clinical and financial outcomes for improved quality, you know, patient safety, and improved clinical and financial outcomes. But then it's actually stratifying those outcomes, right? And the human in the loop now is to actually not just wait for those outcomes, but also to start seeing some process patterns that may emerge as those outcomes eventually will be generated, right? And that is done through systematic approaches. That is done through, again, folks monitoring just what's happening with their populations. Take patient scheduling, for example. Are you starting to see that with AI-assisted patient scheduling, that the stratification metrics are showing you that it tends to lean more one way for a particular demographic versus the other? That's a process pattern, right? That let's try and pick up quickly so we don't have to wait for a adverse outcome or a disparate outcome to actually take place. We're catching these things early. And when it comes to, Andrea, to your question about what does this mean for certification standards, it's really important in our view that organizations have these mechanisms to monitor the outcomes, to stratify the outcomes, and to really look at the process patterns that are taking place when they deploy these AI systems. That's sort of how these tie together. One last piece to that answer is also to start cataloging trust metrics, right? We talk about trust, but I think there's work to do to define trust demonstration to whom, for what purpose, and what's included in that trust demonstration, right? Is it just that, hey, I trained my models correctly? Or is it, hey, look, we actually are, when we identify issues, we address them pretty quickly, right? What are those trust metrics? What are those trust protocols? I think in part of our certification standards, we want to make sure we actually have a common definition of those. And as a shared industry accountability model, we actually demonstrate adherence to those standards. So.
Very, very important points. And I actually want to build on your last observation over here of what questions get asked around trustworthy AI and by whom. And maybe, Sean, we can turn the conversation a bit to you and the work you're doing at OnPoint. Specifically, when you interact with health systems, I'd love if you could expand a bit on what type of questions do you typically get asked as a vendor around equity and fairness of your AI tools? And have you seen an evolution on those conversations? Are those questions evolving from concern to maybe competitive advantage?
Well, the first set of questions is, what do you do with respect to these topics, and how can you illustrate that to us, which we do. The thing that we see from a questioning point of view beyond the table stakes kinds of things like, show us how your AI works, show us it working in an electronic health record system, things that are sort of very tactical. What we get is show us how you're human in the loop and you're human on the loop, both of which we incorporate. Who are they? What do they do specifically? When do they do it? How are they monitored? What's their focus with respect to equity? How do you envelop these concepts into the full approach to what you're providing? And they, again, to my earlier comment, the informed buyer wants not just to hear or see, nice PowerPoint presentations. They want to get under the hood and see how these things actually work. One thing that we've found is with respect to the measurement of these things, this concept of stratification, I'm kind of bridging the last question and this one, um, oftentimes comes to the question of scale. You can illustrate certain things, in a per event, per episode, per visit kind of notion. And then there's the question about the whole population. We've found that stratification at the physician panel level, that being a physician with 1,500 or 2,000 patients, is scale enough to illustrate some of these concepts, but not so much scale that you have to wait for broad deployment to see results. And so these concepts that we're all talking about advancing, I think there's a notion of what matter of scale is sufficient enough to illustrate the effectiveness, the efficacy, your impact or risks with respect to the sorts of concepts that we're all talking about today.
If I could
Thank you.
just, oh,
Yeah.
sorry, Andrea. If I could sort of close the loop on the human in the loop, human on the loop question, I'm going to take it back a little bit and play a bit of the contrarian card here in the sense that there's a very strong need for what I would consider a programmatic approach to the evaluation question, in the sense of every product, once we understand the questions that we're trying to answer for a use case, for a specific implementation on the ground, what are the ways in which we ship every element of that product with the telemetry required for us to be
Looks like
making really good, real decisions? Sorry, what was that?
we
Did
lost
I
you for a
lose you?
second. But yeah,
Sorry.
we are back on. We're back on, Rami.
One of my favorite soapboxes to get on is the need for the evaluation harness. Tie it to your product metrics up front, whatever success looks like, whether it's, improved disease detection or whatever, tie the evaluation harness directly to that. And then to Vic's point, you can start to evaluate against these, whether it's protected classes or these sort of Cartesian coordinates. The correlation matrix is really simple. Well, for, a patient who looks like this, plus has that disease state, you can understand the performance really just in an instant and then start to track the changes in performance over time. And you get a very powerful, again, evaluation harness that does some of these things in an automated fashion that we can then surface to the human in the loop, on the loop, or, sort of we can ensure that we're in the right place on that loop.
Thank you so much, Romy. Thank you, everyone. Our discussion today is rich with so much wisdom and so many insights from being at the forefront of AI governance and AI innovation today. We have a few questions from the audience that I'd like for us to answer. So we're going to go through the first question over here from Jeffrey Pedone. Jeffrey called out one of the frameworks that Alignment AI shared on shadow AI and monitoring infrastructure. That framework calls out that roughly 72% of pilots fail to reach production, often because operational governance lags behind deployment. For organizations that have monitoring infrastructure in place, what post-deployment operational practices have you seen most effectively bridge the gap between pilot success and production sustainability?
I can actually jump in if so the way we configure our life cycle of AI is we have two aspects there, and we call it silent evaluation or shadow AI. I'm actually very big on that concept, which is when we're looking at the tool and see kind of run it almost like in production for X amount of time, let's say 6 weeks, and nobody's using it yet because it hasn't been validated. But behind, we need to be able at that point to collect all reasonable outcomes, and I'll get there in a second as well. That is kind of the silent evaluation. However, the pilot in this case, it's almost like a mini deployment. So once you get to the pilot, so there is a gap there between silent evaluation, which might be not fully embedded into the systems, into workflows. It doesn't have to be, right? Because we're just collecting data behind. But the pilot needs to be in the workflow. It needs to be all implemented, all within kind of the steps, such that if you're able to run a pilot and collect the appropriate metrics, you are ready for deployment, assuming the metrics are proper. I think there might be maybe a differentiation that needs to be done between the silent evaluation and a pilot, because the jump between silent evaluation straight into production, that is a hard one because there is a lot of integration work that needs to be done. But if you do the pilot properly and it's integrated into workflows, then that should not be such a big leap. The other thing I really wanted to highlight, and I know Rami, you also mentioned, in terms of the success metrics, it's really important and highly unusual, actually, setting up success metrics for AI deployments kind of since the beginning. There's a lot of hype, right, about AI and tools that sound fantastic, that sound so interesting, or algorithms that sound fantastic. If you actually like stand back and try to find what are the metrics, how is it actually helping? Those conversations need to happen more often, such that when we talk about monitoring, there's two types of monitoring. One is the technical monitoring. That's where we look at the model accuracy, we look at bias, we look at all the technical, violations that might happen. But then the other type of oversight or governance is the clinical outcomes, patient outcomes, or operational outcomes, for example, efficiency, cost reduction, whatever those success metrics are. But both of them need to exist. And I have seen that sometimes the kind of model owners may want to think about one or the other, but both of them are really important. And your pilot needs to be set up in such a way that is measuring both. And because that once that pilot goes into production, what you're going to be monitoring is both. And you already set up to monitoring both. So if that makes sense, kind of that's how you get your pilots to be closer to deployment.
One of my favorite soapboxes, Natalia, to get on is what I call the living lab of AI. I think to your point, deploying it and deploying a system into shadow mode is absolutely and almost always the right first step. Understanding the juxtaposition between the business metrics that you're trying to improve, plus the technical metrics. As tech people, a lot of times we get really
Mm-hmm.
excited by 1% better performance. And does it really do anything operationally? Did that actually translate
Right.
into better outcomes? Quite possibly not, honestly, even though we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to
Yep.
improve that model incrementally. But
Totally.
I think this is where we can start to lay out like systems that pertain to the actual live operationalization of these systems. This is where we say, hey, we're going to have an alpha test round where it's maybe just 5 super users and we're sort of monitoring them
Mm-hmm.
live and doing some testing in real time. Then maybe we have a beta test where it's half of potential users. I
Mm-hmm.
really can't stress enough the importance and the learnings that come from those pilots, this living lab where the AI
Mm-hmm.
and the human coexist together in the same way that they will in production. And I think it's the most successful implementations that I've seen have done that, and the least successful ones have skipped it.
I would just add very quickly that we see consistently that the more time we spend um, working on understanding, mapping out the existing workflow, we're workflow focused in its current form before we even get to AI, the better the outcome, the closer we are to the end state we're after with the customer's vision. And so I think sometimes you want to get to the cool toys as quickly as you can, but really the more you break down what's happening now and all the different directions it can go, the more likely you are to contemplate the best deployment strategy and metrics, frankly.
Thank you for all those well-anchored insights. And I'd like to transition the conversation actually to something that the audience is nudging us towards, which is data governance and the overlap between data governance and AI governance. Many patients might not feel comfortable with their data being used and processed by an AI system. And there's also a question that is at the macro level, which is around data retention. Right? Some patients might not want data to be retained or even if it's de-identified. Because AI can easily re-identify and connect data points, and maybe cybersecurity attacks done through that AI can become even more catastrophic. So I'd love to hear your perspectives on data privacy, on data governance when it comes to AI implementations and the AI governance umbrella.
I will say that's the core. It had to happen way before AI actually, because kind of data management and security, which is not my area of expertise. I know there is a lot of framework already out there like HIPAA and others that, for example, our organization had to be aligned with long ago. So it's not even, in my opinion, it's not even that AI needs to that we need to, within the AI governance, we need to consider data governance as part. Data governance had to be there before, actually. And then AI is on top, understanding over that in the core, we are adhering to all the appropriate policies, which are the ones that make patients agree to do, you want to use your, can we use your data for research and so on. Again, that's not my area of expertise, but that needs to be the core way before AI governance.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Natalia. And another interesting question we actually got from the audience over here has to do with the collaboration and exchange of information between vendors and enterprises. Sometimes there can be a bit of tension over here, and vendors not being able or choosing not to disclose certain questions asked by the enterprise, and the vendor claiming proprietary privilege. I wonder if the audience has any words of wisdom, any practical approaches they've seen work best to address these roadblocks to vendor evaluation.
I will say that on the large enterprise side, I've sort of lived both on the enterprise side and then also on the very kind of short amount of time on the vendor-esque side as well. And I will say that it is still the Wild West in the AI, particularly for healthcare space. There are wild claims, and anybody can say, well, my system's AI. Is it though? And I think in the absence of a structured rubric to evaluate, such a thing doesn't exist, of course, for the enterprise. So how do we start to answer some of those questions internally? I think that the most successful orgs that I have seen have actually had almost like a parallel management structure. So there's kind of the internal product management. What are the questions that we're trying to solve internally? What are the value levers? What are what do we need to accomplish and why? And then there can be an external one as well saying, hey, here's the ecosystem of available vendors. There's 50 million and, increasing every day. And they're all sort of reaching out to you and they're all sort of asking you to sign up with them. But if you don't have a really strong sense, driven again by that internal value hypothesis of what it is that we need, what it is we need that vendor or that system to accomplish, it can be really hard to evaluate them. So I think I would turn it a little bit and say, rather than focusing the evaluation necessarily just on technical merit, although that's incredibly important too, start to think about what you need them to do. Do they have a track record of doing it? Do you believe they can actually accomplish and deliver?
I might just do a plus to that, Romy. One of the things we've been trying to at least infer or gain consensus on as we think about standards is what is that shared accountability framework between the enterprise and the vendor? Not legal accountability, but ongoing success accountability, right? It's similar to what you were saying, but what is that frame, and are the vendors coming to the table to demonstrate that yes, there will be edge cases, there will be times when the outcomes start deviating from what we thought. But when those things happen, right, what is the agreement across the deployment here to make sure we get this back on track again from an outcomes perspective? And so we've been talking about what some standards might that for look like. Again, to build that trust framework with the end patient, the end user of the AI, but also have a framework around which we can actually evaluate these implementations. So it's just a plus to what you were adding.
I think it's really important if you're on the vendor side to be ready to embrace standards organizations that have achieved a station in the market that is respected, and to be liberal in that embracing. I know one thing that we've done, and I would encourage any vendor to do in the AI space, is every year hire a completely independent firm to evaluate everything you're doing with AI from any and all angles, because I think it's really important, no matter how hard you try not to get caught up in the AI excitement. If you're in that business, everybody wants it to be successful. They want to engage with it, but they also want to be careful and safe and all the things that are really important. And the more third-party eyes that you can have on what you're doing to make yourself better, and to be able to illustrate to your customer partners how committed you are to that, the better, and the better for the marketplace.
Thank you so much, everyone. We're at time, but I'd love to close with action and a really quick rapid fire across the virtual panel over here. If you were launching an AI governance program from scratch tomorrow to enable rapid, responsible innovation, what is the first action that would create the most momentum? Natalia, why don't you start us off?
Sure. And my answer is people. That governing group needs to have representation of all the relevant teams. You can have that group be all from technical folks, for example, that makes, or all clinical folks. It has to be a very varied group throughout the organization, but also it has to have folks that have influence in their respective groups. So in our case, when we were gathering like initial registrations, and it was very important to have our members of the committee kind of being the leaders of governance within their groups and introduce it. And if those are folks that are trusted and can be really heard, then that's the way for them to push it. So I will actually go to the human side and say that it's very important to put in folks who have influence and who will be heard in their respective organizations.
Thank you. Romy, would you like to go next?
Sure. I would say benchmarks. Understand the tools, set your metrics up front, and define what ground truth means for the questions you're asking.
Perfect. Vic?
Very similar to Romy's comparative outcomes against baselines, but comparative outcomes against other implementations too. So
beautiful. And last but not least, Sean?
I would say trust, validated, unbiased, repeatability, traceability, and compliant. I think AI will obviously get there eventually, but the straightest line there is to make sure that we embrace trust.
Thank you so much to our exceptional panel, Natalia, Romy, Vic, and Sean. For everyone watching, the opportunity is enormous. and it belongs to those who build thoughtfully, move decisively, and scale responsibly this AI technology. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you to Alignment AI and to everyone that joined us today. Please visit our website, HLTH.com, to catch up on all health webinars and watch the recording of today's session. Join us in Los Angeles, February 22nd to 25th for Vive.